The next topic that we want to get to is white nationalism and the emergence of Donald Trump and the presence of, there we go. I think that was the second one. White nationalism in the White House. There's one thing to consider in terms of the broader umbrella of white supremacy. We use that language in very academic ways. We use that as a broad analysis of systems of injustice that are clearly racialized. But something has happened here recently that we have to understand and think through, because it has certainly helped to shape where the lines are drawn. And as much as this moment is a question of what are we going to do about law enforcement, people are sick and tired of it, it's also a moment where we see people standing up against white nationalism. Ben, can you walk us into this conversation and talk to us a little bit about dog whistling from Donald Trump, and then this question of white nationalism in the White House? Help us get started here, and then we'll get other folks into the conversation.
Yeah, certainly. So what we have here in this photo is taken last night at the Lincoln Memorial, and you see unidentified police or military units without any discernible patches identifying who they serve with or belong to, blocking protesters' entry into the Lincoln Memorial. And if you, as I'm sure most of the people listening have paid attention, you often see Trump using not only his live speeches, but his Twitter as a way to invoke violence or dog whistle to the base of his party, which is often rather extreme. I'll put it that way. There are so many to choose from that I didn't know where to start, but what I wanted to start with stuff that we're really seeing blossoming now. So I want to go back to April 5th of this year. The press is doing everything within their power to fight the magnificence of the phrase and make America great again. They can't stand the fact that this administration has done more than virtually any other administration in the first 2 years. They are truly the enemy of the people, all in capitals, that last part, enemy of the people, as well as several instances of labeling the media as lamestream media or fake news and everything else. The fact is, since last Friday, the U.S. Freedom Press Tracker, managed by the Freedom of Press Foundation, has found 190 claims of violation of freedom of the press in covering these riots. Normally, when looking at the United States, they document maybe 100 to 150 claims for a year. But in this year, that's for the past 3 years. But in this 4-day period since last Friday, they've had 192, including 108 by police. So we really see that rhetoric of othering, that policy of leading by division playing effect. And we see one of the key components to the First Amendment, a free press, being targeted and affected.
You know, as Donald Trump was on the campaign trail, we heard him refer to his own genetic superiority. We heard him refer to himself as a nationalist, among all the other comments he made. And so we know what happened in Charlottesville. For the other panelists, any other folks want to jump in and talk about how they understand Trump's dog whistling and the calls on white nationalists in his base?
Yeah, I'd like to do this if I can.
Sure, Grant.
Because it's, the white nationalism that we see unfolding is taking the role of the victim, right? White nationalism, we could say it's exploiting a lot of fears that the white population of the United States has about shifting demographics, right? About a Black president, about a changing America. And this is a line that I explore in my article and book, Racism as Self-Love, a shameless plug, right? But if you talk to a lot of Trump supporters, they'll say, I feel like this guy is the last chance to preserve the culture that I grew up with. This guy's the last chance to preserve the America that I know, the America where I don't have to respect Black lives, where I don't have to speak Spanish, where I don't have to play this game of making sure I'm politically correct. And so what Trump's doing is really making, you know, making America great again, is in a sense trying to hold on to the steering wheel, right? It's trying to keep white America in the driver's position here. And that speaks to his base left and right. And it doesn't take the language, it doesn't use the language or the rhetoric of hatred. It isn't explicitly hateful. And so it's kind of an updated version of racism that we're witnessing here, where it's savvy. It knows not to use those old tropes about superiority or domination or hate. Instead, it uses this language of victimhood. It uses this language of self-preservation. And last point, you could see this unfold at the micro level with police officers who, a mantra a lot of law enforcement agents say before they go out on their watch or shift is, whatever happens today, I'm coming home, right? I'm coming back from this. A lot of law enforcement agents say this before they go out on their patrol. So here at both levels, at the interpersonal, the individual, and the political level, you see this effort to preserve the status quo, which again is one of white supremacy. And so that nationalism, we have to be really really clear in how we're trying to criticize it.
I'd agree with that, and I would also add that it's a product of when we specifically talk about policing. Another, I think, great set of stats to mention is kind of the demographics of Milwaukee. So Milwaukee, for those who know me, I say this a lot, but Milwaukee is about 65% people of color, more or less. Slowly growing, I believe, last I checked. The police department is, and I don't have the exact number on this, but it's greater than 70% white. And so to what, Grant's point, not only, and then, kind of to add to that, there was a dissolution of the residency requirements for public officials, during the Walker administration. And so basically what you have is a city in a state that's majority white and a city that's majority black and brown, literally an occupying force made up of people from the suburbs who buy into the ideology that Grant was talking about. One of the things I, like to, Trump is, one of the, I do think he's, and this is my personal view, not for our future anyone else, or anyone on this call necessarily, but my personal view is Trump is an absolute idiot, but he is an absolute genius at being a bully and being divisive. Like he knows how to use, negativity and, caustic, words and his just own nature, his bullying nature, to be divisive. And so, and one of the things that he's very capable of doing is kind of dissolving his racism and the rhetoric of nationalism and, popularity. This guy, as we know, used to be a reality star. And so I call it Alka-Seltzer racism. So it's completely disgusting and nasty if you put the tablet in your mouth, but if you dissolve it in some water or some orange juice, it's not so much. And so the usual kind of middle-class white or working-class white revulsion that sometimes happens when it comes to overt racism is dissolved enough where people, to Grant's point, feel comfortable enough expressing it back in those same type of ways. And, it very much is, if we don't do something now, we're going to die out type situation. And it's really a shame.
Well, he's also very good at offering phrases that are encoded to like I said, the more extreme of the far right. So when he was touring the Ford plant last week, I think it was in Michigan, and he said that, the founders came from a very good bloodline, if you believe in that thing, which, Ford was a virulent Semite who, up until the 1940s, was saying that the Second World War was the result of manipulation by Jewish bankers, received the highest civilian honor from Nazi Germany. And Trump has stated over and over again that he believes that that he has great bloodlines and great genes. So there's that component to it. On the 29th of last month, when he released a tweet, "These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd. I won't let that happen. Any difficulty will assume control. But when the looting starts, the shooting starts." Not only is he using the incredibly racially encoded term thugs, but he's borrowing a direct quote from Miami Police Chief Walter Headley from 1967 that was targeting, African American uprising. So he's placed this game very well of signaling to his base, but doing it so at either on Twitter where he can then walk it back, or claiming, "Oh, well, I just said that, but I didn't know. I just heard that before." It just means that you're protecting your property and things of that nature.
And I think in part with Ben's point to the Twitter use, you cannot underestimate the digital realm and the sort of rise of this rhetoric. So what Grant and both Ben are discussing is the great replacement theory, which then becomes a way to talk about maintaining white status quo without immediately identifying yourself as a eugenicist. Right. And then that digital area becomes the way, when we think about alt-right use of digital spaces, incredibly referential. So it seems innocuous unless you know what the reference is. And my favorite example to talk about this is Pepe the Frog, which is often called the sad frog meme, which I have dropped in the chat an article about it, where the reference itself and most of the uses of this particular image are completely innocuous. It is a sad frog who is sad and is often memified in that way. But to white supremacists, it's a way to identify, if you change certain things about the frog, that another person adheres to these things. And that's shared in boards like 4chan. They have a politically incorrect poll board, I think is what it is, in Reddit, in certain spaces, on 8chan, because it was established that 4chan was too liberal. Now there's another version of it. So like the spaces on the internet where people can create this shared culture cannot be underestimated.
It's like QAnon and the red pill phenomenon too, where they're taking the imagery from the Matrix, and going, "Oh, you've been red pilled," which means that you are now have been awakened to the truth behind the conspiracies attempting to stop Trump, the deep state, Soros, and just all kinds of really, that it can appear innocent if it's just a red pill, but the many layers of meaning behind it, to the, for lack of a better term, faithful, is really there.
Let me pull you all back just a bit, and this is why Lisa is also a doctoral student, and so for the attendees, you see what we mean. You all just dropped those bars so quickly, I'm not sure I even followed you. So you all are telling us about how white nationalists are organizing in the digital space. Is that what you're talking about right now?
Well, I think kind of. So we're talking about the particular kind of racism and white nationalism that we see coming out of the White House and the Trump administration.
Okay.
And we're talking about, if you read Machiavelli's book, The Prince, he makes this one point where he says, look, an effective prince, an effective ruler needs presence. They need to be available. They need to be immediately in your life, right? Where they can keep their hands, in a sense, on the steering wheel, where they have control. And Twitter gives Trump that kind of presence, that kind of availability. Mm-hmm. He's one look down. He's a glance down away from you. All you gotta do is look at your phone, and there he is, right? Mm. And part of the problem here is, in many ways, how we think about racism, because we've become very comfortable in this country thinking about racism from the perspective of hatred. that's how we've been taught to see racism. And here I really want to touch base with the teachers in the audience here, because we continue to talk about racism from the perspective of hatred, and it's an easy target. It's low-hanging fruit, because for many people, all you have to do is give up hatred and you're not racist anymore. And Trump exploits this, because what he does, he says, look, I don't have a hate-filled bone in my body. What I'm concerned with is the shifting demographics of this country. What I'm concerned with is our economy, workers, particularly a subset of our employment base. What I'm concerned about is law and order. And so he can offer all of these dog whistles, all of these tropes that resonate with a rather racist audience, right? In ways that we really haven't seen before. And so we're trying to really talk about how this unfolds not only on the national, level, but also in these micro and interpersonal levels.
If I could just add, I think that's really important what you said, Grant, about how we understand racism. This is Will here, by the way. I think it's also essential, right, that we think about, power as the driving force behind racism. And that's why when we think about power, it's virtually impossible to extricate racism from policing, because policing is fundamentally outlaid to impose power, to preserve hierarchies of power. Going back to what Fred said at the outset of this conversation, police departments coming out of slavery, police departments coming out of managing labor and working in class dispute, power has to be central to any equation of racism. And later on, we're going to get into the war on crime, but for too long in this country, our political leaders focused on that hearts and minds approach. For the teachers out there, right? In the 1940s, you had an intellectual, his name was Gunnar Myrdal. He wrote a really important book that addressed racism, but couched it in a language of hatred, just as Grant's saying. And the solution became addressing the hearts and minds of individuals who express bigotry. And it completely negated the power conversation. So I just want to add that in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
And Rob, before we leave this discussion, I just want to add a counter to this national media of influencing negative reactions to race relations, to just uplift what we saw occur when we saw Brother Floyd being murdered by a police officer through a digital media. Mm-hmm. Racism has always existed, but now racism is being filmed. Right. So the counter solution that could be taught in these classrooms is that don't be silent when you see it. Speak out against it or report it. If you hear somebody, I think I saw a Q&A question, how do you address somebody that has these nationalist ideologies, that have these strong beliefs of nationalism in your circle? I'm not an academic, but my gut reaction is get a different circle.
Right.